Howdy everyone. Okay, so the next step then is to cut. You're supposed to trim this front edge back and this front edge of the side piece back. You're also supposed to trim this inside edge at an angle and bend this edge here in so that you can get the bottom cowling initially on. There are no real instructions on how much to cut or how much to bend. So here's what I elected to do. I've got my cowling on the floor. This is the bottom cowling. That corner of the cowling sits right here where this hinge stops, basically. So with the cowling on the floor, all I did was drop a tape measure straight down, put it on the floor, and basically measured from the floor to this edge here of the cowling. Now my cowling currently, this is cut at an angle. You can see how wide this is here. And at this edge here, it's a lot skinnier. So I measured the shortest distance, or I'm sorry, the longest distance. So I just measured from the floor up to this edge in here. So that basically represents the distance from this corner here where the hinge stops all the way forward to where this lip basically resides. So that distance from the corner of the cowling to this edge, I measured that from here all the way across and made a mark here. And then I added like 1/4 of an inch just to be safe. So I'll take that mark and I'll transfer it onto this piece as well. And then I'll just lop this sidewall off at that mark, and I'll lop this ramp off at the same mark. And for now, I'm going to use this edge as a reference. So this cut line will be 90 degrees to this edge. And this cut line here is going to be 90 degrees to this edge, just for starters. And then at that point, I'm going to try to start bringing the bottom cowling into place, which is going to be extremely difficult, and try to figure out how much this needs to be pushed in, how much more needs to be trimmed off the front. Because remember, like I said, this edge of the ramp also needs to be cut at an angle so this sidewall baffle can be brought in. So I don't know how I'm going to have these pieces in place, bring the bottom cowling up by hand. It's not going to go all the way into place, but I have to somehow hold that in place and then step back and look at these areas, figure out how to trim them. And I have to do that on this side and this side at the same time with the cowling suspended. So let me get this cut and reinstalled, and then I'll see what I can do after that. Howdy everyone. So now I've got the bottom cowling in place with the baffles still in place as well. It wasn't as difficult as I thought. What I do is I've got this adjustable I don't even know what it's called, but it's used for lumber. If you've got to cut long pieces of wood, like on a table saw or whatever, you can adjust the height of this to hold the far end of the wood while you cut it. I can't remember what they're called at the moment. Anyway, I have that set up as basically a helper, and I'll hold the cowling up into rough position very loosely, and then I'll just slide that underneath, and it will basically hold it there for me. And then I can get out from under the airplane and then walk around and start positioning the cowling where I need it to get it attached. So right now, the bottom cowling is held on with the hinge pins through this back edge on both sides, and it's very solid. I don't have anything up through the bottom yet. I just have the hinge pins in place. You can see that, I don't know how well I can film this, but you can see where I had cut this front edge of the side piece and it fits behind the cowling, and I'd cut the front edge of these ramps, and so now they slip up underneath the inlet of the cowling. On both sides, you can see here, this is a bigger gap here, and this fits up underneath here. Ultimately, these will get cut back further, but for now, I'm at least able to get the cowling in place. Everything else is bolted in place. The side wall is screwed in place where it needs to be. The inlet ramps are screwed in place. What I did not do, I did not put this corner bracket back in yet, but I will, because you want everything as real world as possible when you do your final trimming to get everything to fit correctly. So at this point, what I need to do is, the way that I understand it, and I'm going to do it in increments. I'm not going to try to do it all at once. This side wall needs to be brought over so that it matches with this inside edge of the inlet. So this needs to be kicked over to kiss this. Same on this side. This is going to have this forward face, if you will, of this side piece has got to be bent over so that this edge will come over and kiss the inside edge of this piece here. So that means that this ramp, this edge of the ramp is going to have to be trimmed at an angle to allow this to swing over. So all I did initially is I just took a measurement from where this sits now over to this edge here, and whatever that measurement is, that's going to be my initial kick. Not quite as much. I think, for instance, this measurement was like 7/8. So I'm only going to cut this front corner of the ramp. I'm only going to cut that maybe a half. And then this will be able to shift over a 1/2 inch. When I get things refitted, I'll kind of see where it actually ends up with the cowling in place. And if I need to, I can trim that angle on the ramp again to bring this over tighter. The other thing that I need to do, and again, this is for both sides, you can see the gap between the ramp and the cowling. Now this is ultimately going to be bent in two planes. It's going to be bent up, and it's also going to be bent kind of sideways. But the first thing that I want to do is this distance here, where my finger is going, is tighter than this distance here. You can see that there's a larger gap here than there is here. So the first thing that I want to do is take the bend out of this piece. I want to basically unbend this and straighten it so this smaller edge here will come up to the edge of the cowling. I want to close up this small distance first, just by taking this entire ramp and unbending it. And then at some point down the road, I'm going to put another bend in the ramp to bring this edge closer. But for now, all I want to do is bring it up to close up this tight piece here, this tight distance. And I want to cut it at an angle. Again, I want to cut it at an angle in this orientation so that I can bring this sidewall over. So I made a measurement here for this sidewall, and I actually wrote it down. So in this corner here, I don't know if that will show up or not, but I have marked on there a 1/2 inch. I'm going to cut this, I'm going to measure from the edge over a 1/2 inch, draw a line from that mark. From this front corner in here, I'm going to come over a 1/2 inch, and I'll draw a line from that mark back to this corner. And that's where I'm going to cut this ramp off to bring this over. And then I also made another note, just roughly measuring the distance from this cowling edge to where the ramp is sitting naturally. That's about a half an inch of space. So I'm going to unbend this roughly a half of an inch. I'm going to take a half inch off of this front corner, and that will bring the ramp up, and it will bring this wall over. And I need to do the same thing on this side. So I'm going to measure this gap here. Whatever that distance is, I'm going to make a note on the ramp that front corner is going to be cut this distance, and it will be cut back at an angle to this corner. I measured the distance between this ramp and the cowling here. That's roughly 1/4 of an inch. So I made a note that, again, I need to take this ramp and I need to unbend it 1/4 of an inch so that it will mate to the cowling on this side. And then ultimately I'm going to put another bend through it to bring this up to meet this edge. But I'm not there yet. So now at this point, like we've been doing now for quite some time, the bottom cowling has to be unpinned. It's got to be dropped down out of the way. Both forward ramps need to be taken off. Both forward sidewalls need to be taken off. These will need to get bent. The ramps will need to be bent and cut. Reinstall the cowling, see where you end up, and then go from there. So I'm going to take this apart, do the cuts, do the bends, get it back together, and I'll talk to you guys here in a minute.